Good evening. My name is Samantha Furin, and I am a graduate student of history at Liberty University. Tonight, we will be discussing Thomas Jefferson and his Empire of Liberty, which brought into question both his foreign and domestic policies as President of the United States of America. Thomas Jefferson is most notably known for being one of the founding fathers of the United States, as well as penning or being an author of the Declaration of Independence. Playing a role as one of the founding fathers and an author of one of this nation's most incredible forms of policy in regards to government put Thomas Jefferson in a rather unique position. From the time before the American Revolution even began, Thomas Jefferson was political minded. He served as a public advocate here in the United States, but also as an emissary or diplomat on behalf of America in France. In the immediate years following the Revolution here in America and years before the French Revolution began, Thomas Jefferson and other founding fathers found themselves living in France. According to Simon Newman, it was during these early years that Thomas Jefferson used the term nation as he did during the American Revolution and in a relatively non-political way. Thomas Jefferson used it to refer to an entire white population of any given distinct territory, whether that be Great Britain, France, or the United States of America. Thomas Jefferson was elected president in the fall of 1799, and in his first inaugural address on March 4th, 1801, he stated, "A rising nation spread over a wide and fruitful land, advancing rapidly to destinies beyond the reach of mortal eye." While there is some vague imagery here, it stands to reason that Thomas Jefferson believed that expansion of the American territories was what was needed in order to gain power for his people and his nation. Also within that first inaugural address, Thomas Jefferson was noted saying, "The sum of good government was one which will restrain men from injuring one another, shall leave them otherwise free to regulate their own pursuits of industry and improvement, and shall not take from the mouth of labor the bread it has earned." This is reminiscent of Thomas Jefferson's ideas about the power that the federal government holds. It was his goal not to end the federal government, but to limit their power and the influence that they had on the everyday lives of the American people. A few years after his first inaugural address, on January 18th of 1803, Thomas Jefferson addressed Congress. It was in this address that he asked for the appropriation of $2,500 for the purpose of extending the external commerce of the United States. It was this $2,500 that would go to fund the expedition of Meriwether Lewis and William Clark. According to Barry Ballack, Jefferson saw the United States as an agricultural paradise where industrious and virtuous landowners and laborers could secure for themselves and their posterity the blessings of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It was Thomas Jefferson's understanding that in order for his people to be able to enjoy life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, they needed more land and more power and more money to do so. In that same year that Lewis and Clark set out on their expedition, it was made clear that in order for westward expansion for the United States to occur, there were other domestic policies that would have to be enforced. To the public of Washington, D.C. on March 4th, 1809, Thomas Jefferson said to multiply trading houses among them and place within their reach those things which will contribute more to their domestic comfort than the possession of extensive but uncultivated land. This calls into question his policies regarding Native Americans, as he believed that the land in which they lived was indeed wild because they did not follow the societal norms that most Americans did. Alan Taylor stated that vision of white liberty depended upon the systematic disposition of Native peoples and, until the Civil War of the 1860s, upon the perpetuation of black slavery. Thomas Jefferson aptly described the United States as an empire of liberty by and for the white citizenry. While the term empire of liberty would make one believe that all people living in America were of the same rights and liberties, but that was not the case. As we had seen previously, Thomas Jefferson's aims were to promote the well-being of white male laborers and landowners. Michael Hart said that the virtuous goal in Jefferson's mind of all these policies, however vicious, is the assimilation of Native Americans into white society. Native Americans abandoning their traditional hunting economy, becoming agriculturists, and settling their land is a prerequisite to be part of the United States. The likelihood of such traditional Native American tribes giving up the way of life that they knew and had carried them through centuries was unlikely. Thomas Jefferson had to have known that in giving them this ultimatum, there would eventually be conflict. Within the same year that Lewis and Clark set out on their expedition, another large contribution to the American nation was made or purchased. Francis Cogliano said, with the acquisition of New Orleans as well as the vast Louisiana territory, which would afford future generations of farmers with land, Jefferson had, it seemed, provided for future health of the United States. He had helped to create the generation earlier. While yes, the expansion into what was the Louisiana territory and is now a large tract of land, what would be considered the middle of the United States, it's not just what we see as the state of Louisiana, but rather extending from what we know as the state of Louisiana up through Michigan. Eric Foner, in Jefferson's phrase, said that it would be an empire of liberty, bound together by a common devotion to the principles of the Declaration of Independence. Between the years of 1789 and 1815, the United States exceeded in size Great Britain, Spain, and France combined. The addition of the Louisiana Territory made the United States far outreach the power and territory of what was then the global superpowers. Calling into question Jefferson's political thought as far as foreign and domestic politics go, his purchase of the Louisiana Territory would eventually cause some issues during the War of 1812, as that territory had passed many national hands since the early days of the colonies. According to Ari Hilo, what distinguished Jefferson's political thought from ancient political science was his belief in universal human equality. That doesn't fit with what evidence is already showing that Thomas Jefferson only believed in helping to support the lives of white American people. Frank Lampert said that Jefferson's view of America's moral mission to the world, while opposed by many in his own day, has become more broadly accepted in American political culture. There's an issue now with how Jefferson operated because we're imposing what we see as correct societal ideology, or what has become correct societal ideology, on what was socially acceptable back then. Robert McDonald noted that Jefferson, of course, believed that instead of an empire of laws, the United States should constitute an empire of liberty. Curing the nation's ethical ills required medicine from the government than it did strengthening of society. So the nation didn't need the government. It needed to grow its population, its economy, and its territory, in Jefferson's eyes, in order to play on the world stage, in order to be a global superpower. Thomas Jefferson's policies as they relate to the United States were considered normal for the time, but considered backward now, as we are a very accepting and ethnically diverse nation. That wasn't the case then, and our ideals now cannot be imposed. Mark Holacek said that, in short, he almost always aimed to do the right thing, but when he put plans into action, he sometimes tended to force the issue. In that regard, he was at times an impatient, uneasy, and moral pathologist. As we can see, Thomas Jefferson had all the right goals as a president would, especially given the era in which he was elected president. But his ideals and his decision-making comes into question in the years